Another day, another story. From the Unabomber to Bonnie and Clyde, these 13 terrorists and outlaws triggered some of the most massive manhunts in criminal history. From infamous criminals like the Unabomber and Osama bin Laden to notorious outlaws such as Bonnie and Clyde, throughout U.S. history, dramatic manhunts, often involving extensive law enforcement resources and sometimes spanning years, have captured the public's imagination. In 1950, the FBI launched its 10 Most Wanted Fugitives program, which has led to the location or capture of nearly 500 dangerous fugitives. Welcome to Tabo, Eminent Channel. These outlaws evolved from bank robbers, car thieves, and burglars in the 1950s, to social revolutionaries involved in kidnapping, sabotage, and the destruction of government property in the 1960s, to organized crime and terrorism in the 1970s. To drug traffickers, sexual predators, and international terrorists in the 1980s and 1990s. According to the FBI, there are two main criteria for making the list: being a dangerous menace to society and/or having a long record of serious crimes, and the belief that national publicity will help find the fugitive. The following list ranks the top 13 manhunts in modern U.S. history. 1. Unabomber. Ted Kaczynski. One of the longest and most extensive manhunts in U.S. history was the search for the suspect known as the Unabomber, which lasted 17 years, from his first bombing in 1978 to his eventual capture in 1996. Police eventually identified former mathematics professor Ted Kaczynski in the series of bombings targeting universities, airlines, and individuals that resulted in 3 deaths with 23 injured. 2. MLK assassin James Earl Ray, convicted killer of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., shown on August 16, 1978, prior to testifying before the House Select Committee. After assassinating Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee, shooter James Earl Ray led more than 3,000 law enforcement agents on an intense, 2-month-long international manhunt that is one of the FBI's most expansive investigations to date. 3. 9/11's mastermind. Osama bin Laden. The search for Osama bin Laden, the 9/11's mastermind and al-Qaeda founder, remains one of the most high-profile and extensive military manhunt operations in American history. For more than a decade, billions of military and intelligence dollars were spent on the mission, according to former CIA Director Leon Panetta and his Chief of Staff, Jeremy Bash. 4. The Boston Marathon bombers. The intense, high-profile 5-day manhunt for the brothers responsible for the April 15, 2013, bombing near the finish line of the Boston Marathon garnered front-page headlines nationwide involving local, state, and federal agencies. With 3 dead and more than 260 injured at the marathon after they detonated a homemade bomb housed in a pressure cooker, brothers Tamerlan Tsarnaev, 26, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, 19, were soon identified via surveillance footage, and authorities released photos and videos of the suspects on April 18. 5. Lincoln assassin. John Wilkes Booth. One of the earliest high-profile manhunts in modern U.S. history was the search for John Wilkes Booth following his April 14, 1865, assassination of President Abraham Lincoln at the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. With a well-planned getaway route, Booth, accompanied by friend David Harold, evaded capture for 12 days during a multi-state manhunt that involved nearly 1,000 Union soldiers and included a $100,000 reward. Eventually found cornered in a Virginia tobacco barn, Harold surrendered, but Booth refused and was shot and killed. 6. Police shooter. Christopher Dorner. On February 3, 2013, Christopher Dorner, a disgraced former Los Angeles police officer, began a shooting spree in Southern California targeting law enforcement personnel and their families that led to an unprecedented 9-day manhunt. In a manifesto he posted online, Dorner cited grievances with the LAPD, vowing retribution for his firing and unconventional and asymmetrical warfare to those in LAPD uniform, whether on or off duty. You will now live the life of the prey. 7. Olympic Park bomber. Robert Rudolph. Robert Rudolph was the culprit behind a series of bombings across the southern U.S. between 1996 and 1998. including the infamous Centennial Olympic Park pipe bombing during the 1996 Summer Olympics in Atlanta. Also targeting abortion clinics and a gay nightclub, Rudolph was responsible for 2 deaths and injuring more than 150 people. 8. Crime boss James Whitey Bulger. Notorious South Boston. Organized crime boss and FBI informant James Whitey Bulger escaped capture for 16 years after going into hiding in 1994 to avoid being indicted on 19 murder counts and racketeering, extortion, and narcotics charges. On the FBI's most wanted list for 10 years, the $2 million reward for his arrest was the most ever for a domestic target, according to the New York Times. 9. The Beltway snipers Lee Boyd Malvo and John Allen Muhammad terrorized the Washington, D.C. metro area for 3 weeks in October 2002 when they murdered 10 people at random in sniper-style attacks, injuring 3 more. According to the FBI, approximately 400 agents worked the case, with the extensive manhunt involving local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. 10. Son of Sam David Berkowitz. A police mugshot showing convicted New York City serial killer David Berkowitz, known as the Son of Sam. A series of crimes that left 6 dead and 7 others wounded in New York City from July 1976 to July 1977 caused panic in New York City. For more than a year, one of New York's largest manhunts ever, with 300 officers on the case, focused on finding the serial killer, known as the Son of Sam, after calling himself that in a letter he left at one crime scene. 11. Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, the infamous Great Depression-era outlaws known as Bonnie and Clyde, were behind a 1932 to 1934 crime spree, robbing banks, gas stations, and stores across the central U.S., and at least 13 murders, including several police officers. Their shootouts and escapes made national headlines, earning them celebrity status, culminating in one of the most extensive manhunts in U.S. history at that time, according to the FBI. The duo was eventually killed during a police shootout on May 23, 1934, in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. 12. Serial killer. Ted Bundy. The extensive 2-month manhunt for accused captured serial killer Ted Bundy happened after his initial arrest. While on trial in Aspen, Colorado, for the murder of Karen Campbell in June 1977, he escaped from a second-story window and was caught 5 days later. But a few months later in December, he again escaped, this time from his jail cell in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. He murdered 2 women and severely injured 2 others at a Florida State University sorority. He also attacked another FSU student who survived and murdered a 12-year-old girl before a police officer finally arrested him in February 1978 for driving erratically. Bundy confessed to at least 30 murders and was executed by electric chair in 1989. 13. Domestic terrorist Robert J. Matthews. Robert J. Matthews, leader of the white supremacist group The Order, was the focus of one of the largest manhunts in FBI history in the early 1980s, after evading capture for armed robberies, counterfeiting, and planning to overthrow the U.S. government. He was eventually captured on December 8, 1984, at a cabin where he had been hiding on Whidbey Island in Puget Sound, following a dramatic standoff and shootout with federal agents lasting more than 30 hours and setting the cabin on fire. Refusing to surrender, Matthews died, and the FBI arrested 6 members of the order. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.